I'm Sunita Kadiala from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. We have an exciting and a very important panel on ethics and research. This has been a highly demanded session, so we are really looking forward to that. So John McDermott will act as the chair and lead the panel. He will introduce the panelists.
So the first point I'd like to make about research ethics is that ethical research is good quality research, that we need to take ethics into account or it's not good research. And there's some different dimensions we can look at for research, and researchers are better at looking at some than others. So I've got kind of 4 dimensions here, and people look at this in different ways. The quality of science, how robust it is, how repeatable it is, depends a lot on our methods and metrics. What we will deal with more is legitimacy. Is the work legitimate? And that means, is the research process fair, ethical, transparent? Do people know what's going on? So it's an important ethical consideration. Another one is the research relevant? Okay. Is it significant? Is it useful? And there's lots of people who get to decide that other than researchers. And the other one is the research effective? Is it leading to solutions? Is it leading to outcomes that we're looking for? The purpose of this conference is obviously to improve nutrition and health. Those are important outcomes, and the research we do should be effective in providing those solutions. So that's just a kind of overview of the main point that good research needs to consider and incorporate good ethics. So what are some of the ethical issues? Well, the research community, I would say over the past 4 or 5 decades, has really focused on research with human subjects. And how do we actually treat people who are within research, subjects of research, ethically? How do we respect them? How do we make sure that if they're going to do something in research, be part of a research program, that they can give informed consent, that they're aware of what they're doing? How do we set up the research so there's potential benefits for them? And that it's just, so that the different groups that are subject to research have an equal chance for rewards as well as for risk in the research. So that's an important kind of ethical issue, and it arose from the fact that a lot of early research was not done very well and didn't consider the rights of people in the research process. We'll talk about various issues. Many of you will be aware, but not all of you, of kind of ethical reviews that need to take place for proposed research. We'll talk about clinical trials and how they are made transparent and registered and things like that. We'll talk about how to engage stakeholders in research and consult with them, make sure that we outreach with them to get information back to them. And we'll also talk about how the benefits of research are shared more widely, particularly in making data available, making results available, making them fair. So those are some of the ethical issues that we'll tackle in this panel. You and/or the panelists may want to come up with other ethical issues. Clearly, in public health, we're very concerned about bias, that negative results don't get published and positive results do get published, that there's systematic bias by certain interest groups. For example, if you think of the problems of sugary drinks and sugar and nutrition and obesity, there's been some systematic bias in research in that. I think that's been well documented. And then how do we share benefits in terms of intellectual property, intellectual assets as well, for people who are participants, for people who are co-developing, and make sure that the public investments in research are not captured necessarily privately, but also go to the public. So there's a whole range of ethical research issues that we deal with, and I've got 3 panelists to help us explore those who are working on these on a day-to-day basis as in their role as research.
I'm Joseph Sobengo. I come from Malawi. Currently, I'm the director of Center of Ethics for Eastern and Southern Africa called CEBESA. I'm a professor of bioethics. And also, I've been heading the Department of Health Systems and Policy at College of Medicine in the School of Public Health.
What are the kinds of research projects that need ethical review before they start? What are some of the key issues that need to be considered in those projects? And kind of what's the process for ethical review?
It's a good question. Not all research proposals need ethical review, but those only the ones which are involving human participants. And why do we need that? We need that because we know that historically there have been abuse. We know already in the Nazi scandal where doctors were involved in unethical studies. And that's why at the moment, all studies involving human participants, they need ethical review. There are types of study. I just wanted to show you there are several benchmarks which we are using in the review of human participants study. The most important thing, the first thing we look at is that we look at whether there was a community engagement. The second one where we see whether there's a social value. The social value is, for example, a study can bring discrimination. So it should not promote discrimination or gender bias. The other one is scientific validity. We need also, we make sure that there's informed consent. We also look at the justice issue. We look at benefit sharing and risk sharing, and what we call benefit and risk ratios. If we see that research is bringing more negative results, more risks than benefits, we know that any research can carry a risk in itself, but there must be a favorable risk-benefit ratio. There must be this type of studies, a social science study and clinical trials. People, they think both needs also ethical review, even social science. Because social science, they can have what we call social harm.
If a researcher wants to propose a project in the University of Malawi, what process do they follow? How does that work?
So first of all, they have to come, there's a format. The format has to follow what we call College of Medicine Ethics Committee. And that format has to have several key elements. The first key element which we want is that the researcher should have a background, should show that he has done literature review. Why do we need background research? Because we don't want to duplicate, to subject research participants to the very same thing. So duplication is unethical. Second thing we do is that you have to have clear rationale. Why do you want to do this? And it has to be clear. And this is part of the social value or relevance which we have said. And the third one is the objective. And when we are doing objective, we have to have 4 building blocks. The first one is your objective. The second one, the means to achieve your objective. The third one, what is your motive of doing research? Is it good motive? Is it bad motive? That's internal assessment. And the last one is the consequence. What will be the consequence of your results?
Thank you very much. My name is Abdurazak Abizari. One of the key things they are interested in is what is the science in what you are bringing. Is there science in it? So there's a committee that is interested in making sure the scientific background of what you want to investigate is clear and it's important. How are you setting out to carry out this work in a way that is ethical? Then they go ahead to also look at that. And part of checking that is to make sure your protocol is properly written, and all the ethical issues involved are properly laid out. So there are forms you must complete, and part of which they check to make sure your documentation-wise you are fine.
In our work, it's very often that we require ethical approvals in what we do. And the process we use is once you get a project funded, you make a case to the ethical review committee, you give them the details of what that project entails, and they assess the types of review that you will require. If it's a minimal, like what my colleague was talking about, there are various levels of review that is required. Sometimes they may say a project may not require ethical review, and in that way you fill a simple form. But if you are doing a more invasive data collection process, and including humans, then it requires a much more detailed ethical review, in which case you really have to show whether you are protecting, let's say, animals or humans from harm, or how the benefits from the research will be used, and all sorts of things. And maybe I should emphasize that there's also this they stress so much rigor on science, because the main principle is you may waste all your 3 years doing a research which may not translate into beneficial results if your study design is not well thought out. So that's where the main issue is. Just one more point is what I'm now seeing currently is funding agencies are also asking some ethical review to be integrated into the proposal. So whereas in the past 5-10 years we've been doing review after a project has been funded, I'm seeing more and more requests from the donors asking that we should actually integrate the research ethical review, sort of like a framework on ethical review in the proposal itself.
Thank you. So if you think about good quality research from an ANH perspective, one of the kind of research designs that we use a lot are randomized clinical trials. And these were traditionally the domain of public health research and medical research, but increasingly social science and economics have picked these up as well, which is an important point, because for human subject research, it's not just medical or public health research that requires ethical review, it's really social science research as well, and economics. So in kind of looking at clinical trials, one of the safeguards to make sure that the overall portfolio of clinical trials is transparent and we can see what's going on are clinical trial registries. So I would like to kind of ask Joseph about how do clinical trials work, how do people register them, what do you need to do to register clinical trials, and why is that important?
In a clinical trial, there are two rules which you use. It's a stopping, what we call stopping rule. One of the stopping rule is negative results, and another stopping rule is which is safety, and the other one is positive. So if in the clinical trial, if you find that the results are positive quickly, and for example, you're trying a drug, and you find that the intervention arm is doing well, and the control arm is not doing well, then you can stop the study. But the other study can be stopped when you see that the intervention study, people are dying or they're being harmed. And therefore, but in the past you found that those negative results were being hidden. But now at the moment, people have said, even negative results, people can learn from negative results. We don't need to hide. That's why the idea of having a clinical trial registry, which is international, which is transparent, where you register both positive and negative. Now, I just wanted to share with you the issue of the ethics surrounding the clinical randomization clinical trial. Why do we need randomization? It's there to prevent bias, and it's one of the most efficient way of establishing what we call effectiveness and efficacy. And therefore, at the moment, it's interesting that the clinical trial is moving, including what we call community social science-based research. But in the clinical trial randomization, it is very, very important that there are issues which, when you are doing randomization, we need to be careful of the control. The control should always be a standard of care. For example, if you are doing a randomization, a social science, looking at behavior, and then you look at interventions like condom use, other intervention like information, and then your control. You cannot have a control without condom use. Because condom use has become a standard of care. So where there's no care or no standard, then you can use placebo control. So for example, when you are doing drug trial, you cannot use a placebo where there's a standard of care. Ethically, it's not allowed. So for example, you cannot do a study in Malawi looking at malaria, giving people a placebo when there's already a standard of care. But when there's no care at all, you can give nothing as a control. So it's very important to understand, especially many mistakes are done in the clinical trial where drug trials are being tested. People are very careful in looking at the control arm. But in the social science, I think many mistakes have been done because the control arm sometimes is, they're not giving what we call already a standard of package of prevention.
Are you doing clinical trials? How do you register them? How do researchers find out about kind of what to do, how to do these things? I mean, there's researchers out here probably who might be doing clinical trials, haven't thought about register them, etc. How does one find out about that, and how do you go about doing it? Razak, you?
Yes, that's true. We've some experiences with clinical trials. The registers are usually public. You have the WHO registry. You also have the clinicaltrials.gov where you can register your trials. But most of them are funded with public funds, so it's actually free to register your trial. I mean, we just want to emphasize that for all of us in research and interested in doing clinical trials, registering the trial itself is a very important component of research. But by registering, most of the time we are able to prevent some biases related to publication. And that one trial, we are able to publish so many papers from that. But because we have registered it, when you publish 2-3 papers from the same data set, we are able to check and know that all these 3 papers are coming from one trial that was registered. Another thing is able to do is improve collaboration, that you have registered your trial, someone goes online, sees that this trial is up and running, and is thinking of doing something similar. Now they know who to contact in terms of that specific research. So by so doing, you are improving collaboration. By extension, you avoid duplication. And duplication by itself in research is unethical. It means you haven't done your homework well. People are doing the same thing and you didn't check, and you are repeating it.
Frequently we see in published literature now that there'll be a specific paper on the primary outcome of the trial as registered. And then if you've declared secondary outcomes and shown your methods, then you can get on to other papers looking at secondary outcomes and tie them up to the research design that you've had before. And often the secondary outcomes are more exploratory and the primary outcome is the way the trial has been designed. So yeah, it's a great point. Bernard, do you want to add anything?
Just a small example which we did with a drug company in Kenya, more on the veterinary side, and they were developing a product for controlling tsetse flies. And so the work was registered with the Pest Controls Products Board, which was monitoring what we were doing. And all what we agreed in terms of that work was to do blind trial. So right from the stage at which you are given a product, it wasn't specified as which one was a new registered product. So that in a way helped in reducing biases. And also the research team that was involved didn't know which of the 2 products was under test. And even the way the data was structured in the database, it was just using codes, which doesn't reveal which one was being tested. So in a way, that helped in reducing biases in terms of the assessment of the product.
When Joseph started, he mentioned 3 kind of criteria for looking at the ethics of studies. One was on community engagement, one was on social value, and one was on the kind of the quality, and then the last one was kind of on the quality of the research and did we get the benefits. So I'd like to turn to Razak and ask him a little bit about community engagement in research and then community engagement in terms of the findings of research and their implications.
Research is not an end in itself. There's a bigger goal. And the bigger goal is a community-wide good. So research is to benefit society. And part of the processes of getting it done, society should be engaged. And part of that engagement, we need to identify the various sectors of the society that will need different kinds of engagement. So that calls for kind of stakeholder identification, stakeholder analysis, stakeholder engagement. Because at different tiers of these stakeholders, what you need to do and what they will bring in on board the research will differ. So for us, my university, what we do most of the time, and that makes us different, is that we are community-based. We are established by law to be different in the way we train and in the way we do research. So the community is first. So right from the conception of the idea and roll out through implementation all the way to dissemination of results, we engage the communities around us because eventually they will be benefiting. And what we do, 3 main things in the university: teach, research, and do extension. What you teach is informed by your research. Your extension is also informed by what you find from your research. So if the community is not engaged to buy into what is necessary, what is relevant, what is most impactful in their lives, what you find will not be useful. So we in my experience in UDS, most of the time we engage the communities around us before we start.
So can you describe to us one of your projects and how you've engaged the community, just so people get a sense of how you do that?
The very recent one we did was on rice fortification. It was a trial. Most of the time when we think about trials, we don't see the angle where the community is engaged. But this, we tried to take it far away from the lab, from the controlled environment within the university. So we located it within the community. Partly was for community members, for parents to see that whatever we're doing, and this involved children, school children, and we had to prepare fortified rice for them to eat. So to get them part of it and to know that we don't mean any harm. The trial itself, the feeding was done within the community. The chief and the elders of the community were engaged way ahead of the trial, and they got to understand why we needed to find a way of fortifying rice, because it's a very difficult vehicle. So once they bought into that idea and we started the trial, once in a while the chief and other parents would just stop by to see how you are doing with the kids. And the first 2 days when they knew that nothing untoward was happening, they stopped coming. But at least you are being accountable. By engaging them, you are also saying that I have nothing to hide. You can come and see what we are doing with your kids, and the end is a collective good we're trying to promote, and not that we are just coming from the university trying to answer some questions and move away.
The last kind of systematic issue in terms of research ethics and the kind of social values and the values that we get out of publicly invested research, I wanted to turn to Bernard and get you to talk about kind of how you share data, what are some of the constraints to that, how you let other people know what's available. We're getting lots of demands from the public investors in research that we get more value out of research, and one of the ways is to share data so that other people can do analyses on it. So can you tell us a bit about your experience with that, Bernard?
Recently we completed a project which was funded by ESPA, that's Ecosystem Services for Poverty Alleviation. And one of the conditions, or one of the requirements we were given was to share data openly in public repositories. And all what we did was, because we knew in advance before the project started that will be the goal, we put in process of making sure that the data we collected met the standards which were required. So first of all, ensuring that we remove any information in the data set that will reveal the sources of data. Things like names of the individuals being sampled, things like the coordinates of the locations where you are collecting data from. And we cleaned the data to make sure that it can be reused by anybody else out there in terms of when you want to redo the analysis. We then also prepared a metadata file which describes the procedure in which the data was collected. We described all the variables in the data set, and then provided supporting material, including the methods which were used for screening in the lab, and the various analyses which have been done on the data set. And all what we did was to post the data to the database which was provided by the funding agency. But of course, we also learned that in our own institution, we also have a database that can be used for public posting of the data. But in this case, because we had a condition, we had to post it to the UK-funded institution. And the data is available. We can share the link for anybody who wants to reanalyze the data set. And I think the emphasis which we have been making is that process helps a lot in terms of enhancing rigor in how you collect your data set in the field. And also it enables you to get much more benefits in terms of your data being referenced by other scientists, so you get your own references. But also the data can be used by others in meta-analysis. And in that way, the benefits will still go back to the community which participated in that data collection process. So I think it was a very good experience for us because it's not usual that data is made available and you have to convince your partners that we have to publish quite early in time so that by the time you are releasing your data set, people are already confident or comfortable that they'll not miss out in terms of publications.
Please feel free to share your experiences, your insights into ethical issues involved with research.
The first one is a question I keep struggling when we're discussing ethics. And the question really is, where does ethics and science separate? To what extent can they be mutually exclusive or independent of each other? Because as Joseph was saying, so a good designed study, also that contributes to the ethics of a study. But where does ethics stop and science take over? Or are they supposed to be separate? Secondly is, I just want experience from friends in terms of ethical review fees. Not to blame Joseph, but I think in Malawi we have a standard fee of around 10%. And allow me to say something unethical. I know of studies, not that I participated, where they literally have to tweak the figures because the ethical review fees become too high. So I know that in other universities, you have the graduation design where if a study reaches a certain level, there's just a standard fee, a flat figure. So I wanted to hear experience from colleagues. Just to emphasize, I think the point that was mentioned about sharing research results with the community, I think it's very important because people really feel valued if you share. And as was said, it is very unethical to do study and not share the results. Thank you.
When you share, when you release the data for the public, you say you want to exclude geo-referenced variables, but those indicators are sometimes very important. So could there be any other way? And instead of excluding them from release, could there be any other way to make them available? Not just to make them identify actual respondents, but to a certain extent, maybe neighborhood or something?
One of the things that we have followed in this trial as per the good clinical practice is recording all severe adverse events in all our arms, be it control or the intervention arms. So I just wanted to get an understanding from the group here, what are the practices that's being followed? If you are part of clinical trials, how do you record that? How do you maintain confidentiality? And what kind of subsequent actions are being taken? Thank you.
How do we handle compensation for respondents when we administer questionnaires in the field? What are the experiences?
Do you want to answer that one on compensation?
I wanted to talk a little bit about after the research has happened and the ethics around dissemination to the populations in which we work. I feel like we do a pretty good job making sure we do the research right, but I would like maybe some best practices for dissemination back. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, the dissemination after.
I just wanted to highlight the issue of safeguarding program participants. So that's issues I hear that we're going in to talk to children and so on. So normally in our organization you have to sign certain forms and that's been certain controls around accessing children and I suppose women as well in this year that we have that in it with the various scandals and so on that we've had. Thank you.
My question is, we have a study that we have to do and we will be tracking households that were interviewed in 2006-07. But then at the time of being interviewed, the data was not meant that right now we should be tracking them. So my question is, if we were to track those individuals using their identifiers, how do we go about not being unethical about it, and what have been the experiences for other researchers? Thank you.
My question goes to a case in point in the UDS, where you engage communities as your first point of contact. Has there been any history of leading a research in the community that has triggered a change? And therefore, what strategy did you use in engaging such a change? Thank you.
I was wondering if there has been any reflection regarding to the use of mobile devices and the amount of data that is produced that needs different ways of anonymization and other ways to trying to protect the privacy and consent of our respondents. Thank you.
The first question was very provocative. What is the marriage or relationship between science and ethics? I think if you look at historically, the first science, you look at Plato, Socrates, the first scientific question was about truth, searching for the truth. And therefore, when you don't have a desire for the truth, you cannot be a scientist. And therefore, if you say science, science is a science of objectivity. You want to be objective, you want to find an objective answer. So subjectivism is not scientific, and therefore it's no. So if you look at the first scientific question, according to Plato and Socrates in the Greek philosophy, you find the first desire or the desire for the truth. Then after that, they discovered about other things, medicine and all that. So I just feel you cannot become a scientist if you are not objective. So veracity and the validity are two sides of the same coin. I just want to talk about the research compensation. There are two types of compensation. These are a heated debate at the moment about compensation for research participants. Do we need to compensate research participants? Is it ethical? The question is, yes, it's ethical to compensate research participants. But it becomes unethical when that compensation is excessive and can hinder their decision making.
Yeah.
So I think, but what about, what is the difference between compensation and incentive? Compensation is when you are compensating for their time, for their transport, it's like an investment. Incentive is used in a clinical trial to promote retention. There's some certain clinical trial when somebody drop out, it can destroy the whole clinical trial. So incentives are needed to keep for detention. But that incentive should not be excessive.
I think a research that is around sensory evaluation, it involves human subjects. It involves giving them some food item to eat. And I think it's legitimate if there is call for ethical clearance for that type of work. Because you are going to expose them to something they themselves did not prepare. So basically you want to keep them away from harm. So by going through the processes of the ethical clearance, which is rigorous, you are made to declare how you are going to keep this sample safe for consumption in such a way that they are going to protect the human subjects. So I personally think you need clearance to do sensory evaluation. The other one has to do with research triggering change. Sometimes we look for change at the macro level, and other times we look for change at the micro level. And most of the time, our starting point to look for change as researchers is more micro, and hoping that the micro changes are informing the macro changes that we eventually want to see. Each of us is doing a little bit here and there towards the macro changes. But what I have done in the recent past regarding fortification, we've seen that whatever interventions we're trying, we saw changes at the child level, indicating that we have influenced a change. But sometimes you also want to see a change in dietary behavior at the household level. And eventually children fed better and they grow up better, they become more educable. Eventually the society changes in ways that you did not imagine with a small intervention that you did. So it's difficult to point out a macro community level change that happens because of a research. But then the micro ones you can immediately measure on a daily basis. Those are the ones we measure and report in our research articles and dissemination workshops. So yes, science gets results and is able to trigger a change. And that is our experience in UDS.
Okay.
One of the key principles in ethics is privacy, or maintaining confidence and privacy of an individual. And so we should, at most, try to remove all that information that can lead us to identifying individuals. And I think what John said earlier on about processing that data to give you other indicators like distance to a given area, or extracting information that wouldn't pin you down to identifying that individual, can be acceptable. But of course, we should remove all those indicators which can give us a specific identifiers. I think there was another question on obtaining ethical clearance from mobile phone companies. And I think it's tricky, but what we have done in the past is we're working with pastoralists, and we wanted to identify their locations in time. And we were thinking we can get locations nearest to a given mast. And so when we applied for that clearance from a phone company, the discussion was very much us processing the data to remove the information about that individual, but only retaining movement patterns of those individuals in a given area. So I think what you're asking is much deeper, and I think there's a lot that can be considered in that, but I think our experience was very much limited to movement patterns of pastoralists using mobile phones.
No, okay, thanks. That's quite useful. So I just want to sum up with a couple of points. We raised a lot of issues, both from the floor and from the panel, in terms of some of the tricky issues and the trade-offs between kind of research and what we'd like to achieve and ethics. And when I started, I kind of presented the fact that if we were going to do ethical research, it obviously had to be good quality because it had to be relevant, it had to be effective, etc. But there are some instances, and I think they've come up here, where there will be ethical considerations that may not help the research, in which we have to look at people's personal choices even, personal identification, what they're feeling. So this is an interplay, and there's a lot of negotiation in a sense between these things. And these negotiations change over time. I'm thinking mobile data. For infectious diseases, we used to get access to mobile data very easily 5-10 years ago. Now it's tough because there's a lot of control over that. So I think this kind of trade-offs and the tricky ethical issues that come up and how we deal with them is very important. And that leads me to the kind of second point, which might be something that we'll think about in the ANH Academy, is how do we follow it up? And can we make kind of resources available for the community on some of these ethical issues, how to access things, share experiences and things like that. I think this has been a good kind of session for raising a lot of the issues, but there's considerable need to follow up. And I appreciate all the kind of comments we got from the floor, because I think it made it a much richer discussion. But I would like you to help me to thank the panel for adding a lot of value to this discussion and what's going on.